Hey guys, Jimmy here. I don't know if you've heard, but the Wii U is dead, and what we have in its wake is the Nintendo Switch, a new console-tablet hybrid from Nintendo that they hope will stand on its own next to the PS4 and Xbox One and recapture some of that die-hard Nintendo fan audience they definitely lost with their Fisher-Price toy that came out a few years ago. Now, this thing has its fair share of problems. I'm not gonna lie, it's definitely not perfect, but there is a lot to love about it, and I will get into that more now. So, what is it? It's a 6.9-inch capacitive touchscreen 720p tablet that also plays Nintendo games, like The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild, a game we've been waiting years and years for. But I gotta say, there's no virtual console yet, there's no internet browser yet, there's no apps yet, and there's a lot of yets. That's what you're gonna keep hearing me say. You know, Nintendo had to work really hard to make sure they released this thing on my birthday. That's a deadline I set for them, but a lot of the stuff that should be on it isn't on it yet, and it's coming in the fall, which is kind of a bummer. But there are some modern additions to this thing that are so un-Nintendo-like that it's crazy. Like, for example, how Nintendo went with USB-C, which is the new standard for Android phones, the MacBook Pro, and pretty much anything else out there you can think of going forward, instead of using proprietary cord that's going to cost you an arm or a leg if you lose it. And instead of using their own proprietary memory cards, they actually just went with the very standard and pretty cheap micro SD, which will get you an extra realistic 256 gigabytes of storage on top of the meager 32 gigabytes this thing has out of the box. It also supports up to 2 terabytes of extra storage through micro SD, but come on, that's not going to be a realistic solution for quite a while. The console itself is actually surprisingly solid. The screen is plastic, which is embarrassing in 2017, but the rest of it is also plastic, but it has a great finish on it that feels good in your hands, and it's got that Nintendo tough durability that feels like you could chuck this thing at the wall and have it bounce right back into your hands. In terms of ports, you're going to find a USB-C port, a volume rocker, a power button, a headphone jack, the rails for the Joy-Cons, and 2 front-facing speakers, and finally you're going to find that SD card slot right under the kickstand. The kickstand itself is a double-edged sword. It's cool to have it on here, but it only works on hard surfaces like your table or the floor. If you put it on a couch, it's going to fall right over. Also, it's really flimsy, but if you put too much pressure on the switch, it just pops right off, and you can push it right back on, which is cool because Nintendo's thinking forward, and this thing is going to be played by kids, so having that functionality is really good. Now let's talk about how you're going to actually be playing this thing. The Nintendo Switch comes with 2 Joy-Cons, and they are really expensive, so do not lose them. They're basically mirror images of each other. There's a left one and a right one, but the joysticks and the buttons are flip-flopped on which one is on the top and which one is on the bottom. The left one also has a screenshot button, and on the right one you have a home button. It feels really good in your hand. It is very small. Like, people with bigger hands are going to have a little bit of a trouble holding this. They're a lot smaller than a Wiimote, but they do feel much more solid. They can also be held sideways, and that's not the best way to play with them, but it totally works. Also, if you're going to be playing games like Zelda or even Mario Kart in the future, it has a Joy-Con grip, which is just essentially what turns it into any old other controller. And while a lot of people are saying that you definitely need the ridiculously overpriced Pro controller, I totally think what they included is fine. You really don't need to spend $70 extra on this. So by now you probably heard of the weird connection issue the left Joy-Con has, and I have experienced it, which kind of sucks because it seems like it's hardware related. Basically, it loses full connection if you put your finger too far in front of the controller. So if you rest your middle knuckle on the trigger, that'll replicate it, and so the way I remedied it is by just using the tip of my left finger, which is more natural anyway. It just sucks that I have to deal with that, and it's likely a hardware issue. Nintendo's traditionally been really good about fixing that stuff, but I don't want to have to send in my Joy-Con or anything like that because of an oversight on Nintendo's end. That is a real problem. My biggest issues with the Switch actually come with the included dock. This thing is totally bare bones. First off, when you slide the Nintendo Switch into it, there's no protection whatsoever. There's no soft sticker, there's no foam, there's nothing. So your screen is inevitably going to be scratched, especially in the bottom left corner, just by sliding it in and out of the dock that makes it go into TV mode. So that really sucks. They did include more than enough USB 3.0 ports. I think there's actually 3, and having the standard USB-C port for the AC adapter is fine, and that's all well and good, but there's no optical out, which is a huge bummer. And when you couple that with the fact that you can't even use Bluetooth headphones with the Switch, that really leaves you optionless in terms of using any speakers except your TV's speakers if it doesn't support optical out, and that is such a bummer. The bigger problem with this thing also comes from processing power. So when you're using the Switch in handheld mode, it's going to run in 720p, and that looks great on the screen. The screen looks awesome. The color reproduction is great, and so are the viewing angles. And the PPI of, I think, 237 is very high. It's actually higher than a 13-inch MacBook Pro. So if you think about it like that, 720p, even though it is outdated, isn't so bad. And when you dock the Switch, it'll run 1080p. And Zelda runs 900p upscaled to 1080p. Snipper Clips, I think, runs at 1080p. But overall, you're going to get a pretty clear image out of the Switch. And that's all done with the processor of the device. The reason that it kind of limits itself when you take it out is so that the 4300, I think, and change milliamp hour battery doesn't die on you. It's supposed to last 3 hours, and I totally got that with Zelda. And with something like Shovel Knight, it'll last you a lot longer. But I feel like Nintendo totally dropped the ball here on the dock. You know down the line they're going to charge us an arm and a leg for a dock with a bigger processor in it that, boost it to maybe 4K resolution. There's also no Ethernet port on the dock, so when you kind of think about that, and also the fact that Nintendo's full online service doesn't launch till fall, it really doesn't put, a nice feeling in your heart about where online's gonna go with this thing, even though Nintendo wants us to think it's gonna be great. Between handheld and TV mode, there's caveats to both, but I actually like them both equally. Now let's move on to the OS itself. I think it's great. It runs well, it's clean, but it just doesn't do a whole lot. This thing doesn't have a ton of features out of the box, but what's here works really well. Instead of relying on visual charm for the Switch like they did with the Wii U and 3DS, Nintendo's relying more on sound to really charm you into wanting to play this thing, and it totally works. The sound when you put the Joy-Cons into the rails is amazing, and the feedback you get when you're tapping on stuff or hitting buttons is awesome. It's great, it's a really good departure, and it doesn't feel like a kid's toy anymore, which I think is important. So finally, with the online stuff, if you were hoping that Nintendo was going to move away from friend codes with this thing because they let us pick our Nintendo Network usernames, you're going to be disappointed. You still have to use friend codes, which at this point, we're 3 consoles into that, it's just an embarrassing joke. I don't want to hear any excuses about like, oh, it's harder for kids to get harassed online. They don't have any games that offer online right now, except for Bomberman, so it's just not an excuse anymore. They really need to update that. So whatever's coming out this fall in terms of online, it better have a way to add friends with usernames. But right now, what we get out of the box is a joke. So if you're hoping for anything that's even competent, you're not going to get it. It's just as stupid as it's always been. So it feels like at this point, every good thing I say about the Switch comes with like 19 caveats, but I love it. It's an amazing console. It feels great to hold in your hand, and it really lays the groundwork for Nintendo to pick up the ball that it dropped with the Wii U. I think what gets me most excited is the fact that I can be sitting on my couch playing Zelda like any other PS4 or Xbox One game, and then I can just get up, put some controllers on the side, pull it out of the dock, and walk out and play the exact same game with very little graphical downgrade on a portable system. That is insanely cool. And they have some great games coming out in the near future, like Mario Kart 8, Skyrim, Mario Odyssey towards the end of the year. They've really done a good job of stretching out big releases, and hopefully third parties flock to this thing like indie developers seem to be already. I think that's really cool. So I can't give this thing the overall recommend go buy it now, but if you're into tech, you're a lost Nintendo fan, or any of these games sound remotely cool to you, or if you're just a huge Zelda fan, I can say you should buy this thing. If you're someone who's like, man, I've never had a Nintendo console before, I've always hated them, this is not the console that's going to change your mind yet, but it very well could be in the future. I've never reviewed a console before, so if this video sucks, you know what to do. Hit that thumbs down. But if you liked it, you could do me a huge favor, hit the thumbs up, comment, and subscribe. That's the 3 big things you gotta do on YouTube. Now, I really want to get back to Zelda, so I'm gonna go, but I just gotta say thanks for watching. As always, guys, I'm Jimmy Champane, and I'll see you in the next one.